if I have a comment, I'll unmute and come on
Great.
camera.
That's
So,
great. Or you can drop it in the chat, whatever you want.
right, yeah.
Good to
Right.
see you. Hi, Daniel. Okay, Anna, I think we're ready to do the bracha over Torah study. And Marilyn, would you like to recite the bracha this morning? You can unmute yourself, Marilyn, if you want.
Yes.
Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah to soak up Torah.
Amen, amen. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody, we have an enormous, amazing parsha today. It's called Kitisa, and so much happens in it. What we're going to focus on today is the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, and all the implications of that sin, how it happens, why it happens, what happens, to kind of heal that, what I'm calling that wound between God and the people. So I'm going to share my screen. We're just going to dive in. Okay, and good morning, Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom to the people who are coming on now. Okay, so here, I called it Wounding and Healing. So what I want to do first, before we get into the sin itself, is say a little bit about the structure of the narrative, which is fascinating, and give you a taste of what things look like from the people's point of view. And the Torah is really interesting because sometimes the Torah just says B'nei Israel, in the eyes of the people, and it's really interesting and instructive where they say that. So if you remember, Moses goes up Mount Sinai, and then we have the revelation of what's called now the Ten Commandments, and then Moshe is about to go back up the mountain here in Exodus 25 or 24, which is before this parsha, right? A few parshiot ago, in Mishpatim. So I want to look at this. Now, this is right after Moshe and the elders have a kind of, a mystical experience, beholding God, or at least the feet of God, and then feasting. And this is what Moses says right afterwards. And this, again, precedes the golden calf by a number of chapters. But right after this, we see Moses going up, and then we have two parshas of just receiving the instructions for the sanctuary. Okay, so we're going to say, here's where we say goodbye to Moshe. And I want to look at how we say goodbye to Moshe, because the golden calf is all about the people being anxious in Moshe's absence. Okay, so here's where they last see Moshe. So, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Ale Elai Hahara, v'heyesh sham. So God says to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, or really literally be there. Ve'etna lecha et luchot ha'even, and I will give you the tablets of stone, v'haTorah, v'hamitzvah, asher katavti lahorotam. The stone tablets with the teaching and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them. So this word just, in passing, lahorotam, to instruct them, is from the same root that Torah is, our book of instruction. Vayakam Moshe v'Yehoshua misharto, and Moses and his the young lad Yehoshua who served him got up. Vayal Moshe el har Elohim, and Moshe came up to the mountain of God. Okay, so now here's what happened. Ve'el haskenim amar shvu lanu bazeh az asher nashuv alechem v'hinei Aharon v'chur imachem mi va'al dvarim yigash elehem. To the elders he had said, wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them. So note that he does not tell the people he is leaving. He only tells the elders that he is going and what to do in his absence. Vaya'al Moshe el hahar v'yichas ha'anan et hahar. So Moses had ascended the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. So basically, Moses is going to disappear into that cloud. Vayishkon kvod Adonai al har Sinai, vayichasehu he'anan. The presence of Adonai abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. Vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i mitoch he'anan. On the 7th day, God called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Okay, so here's the point I was talking about before. Here's what it looks like in the eyes of Bnei Israel. Umar'eh kvod Adonai ke'esh ochelet birosh hahar le'enei bnei Yisrael. Now the presence of Adonai appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. One second, here's a chumash if you need it. So if you recall, if we go back a few chapters, Moses at the burning bush, when he saw the bush, he saw a bush that was not consumed by fire. V'hasneh bo'er ba'esh v'hasneh einenu ukal. Right, but when the Israelites see fire, and they see God's fire here, what they see is a consuming fire, right, which is a terrifying image. And Moshe, if you remember, especially after they heard, again, what we call the Ten Commandments, Moshe is their intermediary. After they heard God's voice directly, they were absolutely terrified and said, don't let God speak to us because we will die. So Moshe really stands between them and God, and in a sense, between them and death. Because for them, the intensity of God means, on some level, death. Or at least they equate the two in the Torah. So Vayavo Moshe b'toch ha'anan, Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain. Vayal hahar. So again, Moshe disappears into the cloud and has never told his people where he was going. Vayihi Moshe bahar arba'im yom va'arba'im laila. And Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so that's the backdrop. Let's do one more piece and then we can talk about it a little bit. So between that point in the narrative and the golden calf, what we have is Moshe with God on the mountain receiving again the instructions for the sanctuary. And if you could imagine a split screen. So Moshe was with God hearing all these kind of ephemeral, beautiful details for building the sanctuary, the blue and the scarlet and the gold and the garb of the priests and the jewels on the priests, sort of, I don't know what to call it, breastplate. So all these beautiful, intricate details at the same time that the people are downstairs below, right? Moses above with mountain with God, and the people are below flipping out. Right? This happens at the same time, even though it's, chronological in the Torah, it's actually happening at the same time. So let's see what's going on with the people again. And what I really want to do here is sort of experience this and see it as the people, as much as we can, as the people are experiencing it and seeing it. Vayar ha'am, and this is the very beginning of this parsha. No, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not the beginning of this parsha. It's the beginning of the narrative in this parsha. Vayar ha'am ki voshesh Moshe laredet min hahar. When the people saw that Moses was so long and coming down from the mountain, vayikahel ha'am al haron vayomru elav, kum aselanu Elohim asher yalchu lefanenu, ki zeh Moshe ha'ish asher helinu mi'Mitzrayim, me'eretz Mitzrayim, lo yadanu mehayalo. So they gather against Aaron and say to him, come make us a God who shall go before us, for that fellow Moses. Right? It's very interesting how they refer to him, because Zeh, like as if they don't know him, Moshe, Ha'ish, that man, right? So this guy, right, this guy who took us out of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. Lo yadanu mehayalo lo. So they're in a state of unknowing. They're in a state of fear. And interestingly enough, Everett Fox translates Vayar ha'am ki voshesh Moshe, which indicates that Moshe is late, as shamefully late, because boshesh sounds like busha, which is a shame. So I'm not sure how shame plays into the story, but it's an interesting sort of word association. Okay. Vayomar alehem Aharon parku nizmei hazaav asher beoznei nishechem benechem uvenotchehem v'haviu elai. So Aaron said to them, you men, which is interesting because the rabbis understand that the golden calf is the sin of the men and not the women. So you men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. And we've discussed here, and also in other places, that where did they get this gold from? They got the gold from, they despoiled the Egyptians on their way out, right? A kind of perhaps reparations, one could say. And that gold is the gold that was used for the Mishkan, or was intended use for the Mishkan. And here it's being used as a golden calf for a golden calf. Okay, 4. 3. Vayiparku kol ha'am et nizmei hazahav asher ba'oznehem v'yaviu el Aharon. And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aharon. So I don't know if kol ha'am is everybody, the men and the women, or the men were taking it off the ears of the women. I don't know, but it says kol ha'am, the whole people. Vayikach miyadam v'yetzer oto b'acheret v'yasehu egel masecha. He took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. Vayomru ele Elohecha Yisrael asher helucha me eretz Mitzrayim. And they exclaimed, this is your God. But really it's plural. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Oh my God, how could they say that? They're looking at a golden calf and they're saying, this Israel is your God or your gods that brought you out of Egypt. What is going on here? What explains that sort of shift of in the narrative in their own minds? How could they possibly think that? Vayar Aharon vayiven mizbeach lefanav vayikra Aharon vayomer chag l'Adonai machar. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, tomorrow shall be a festival of, and here we use the name of Yud Hey Vav Hey. So that's interesting. So it'll be a festival of Yud Hey Vav Hey tomorrow. Vayishkimu mimacharat v'ya'alu olot v'yagishu shlamim v'yashev ha'am lechol v'shato v'yakumu l'tzachek. Early next day, people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to dance. So they're having a great time celebrating this calf. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe. Okay, so actually that's part of the next piece. So I'm going to stop my share and see where everybody's at. Okay, I see there's already a lot in the chat. What did I miss? Oh my God. I'll try to look at it quickly, but if people want to say something, please raise your hands. Let's see. Okay, I see hands, so I'm going to stop reading the chat. Sarah Tova, Roberta, Alana, great to see you. Take it away. And as usual, just, keep in mind that a lot of people want to speak, so be as concise as possible. Thank you.
All right. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I am, there are so many things. There were 2 words that I'm looking at in Hebrew, Masecha, Egel Masecha, which the mask. So is this really the mask for Hashem? And is this why there was a festivity the next day for Yud Hey Vav Hey? It's really just a mask for Yud Hey Vav Hey. Is that what he meant? Like that's one thing. And then litzachek, like we've heard litzachek or to laugh. And the translation is to dance, which it really isn't. What is
litzachek has many meanings in the Torah, but you're right. Yes. One of them is not dance.
Not dance, and it's not really danced. Yeah. Is there a sexual connotation? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, it can be sexual connotation there. Absolutely.
So I have more questions. Like, is the Masecha the mask? And what is litzachek? And those are two beginnings, and I'll let someone
Okay,
else.
so let me say a few things. Number one thing I forgot to say is that if you think about gold and you think about fire, gold is kind of the image of fire made static, right? So gold, making a golden calf perhaps gives them a sense of control where they have no control whatsoever before the fiery god that threatens to consume them, right? So, that's their kind of fixing, so to speak, fixing God in one place. Number two, the Masecha word is really interesting. I've only seen it translated as molten, but you're right, the word Masecha means mask. Does it mean mask in the Torah? I don't know. Maybe someone can remark on that in the chat. I don't think so, but I really don't know. And if it is mask, then is it sort of they're wanting somehow to connect to God, but they've sort of missed the mark, right? So they've only reached the mask of God and not God. That's what I'm just sort of droshing or with you at this moment. That's what I'm thinking. All right, thank you for that. Okay, Roberta and Alana and Nehemiah.
Yeah, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. That's just to think about that is the golden calf is a mask, actually, right? Anyway, that's not what I was going to say. I was looking at what's going on that Moses has this perception that of God that leads to him being enlightened. The people have this perception of God, right, that leads to building a golden calf and fear. And the Torah is only explicit in terms of the people see a consuming fire, and Moses has seen the fire that doesn't consume. And I just think Torah is teaching us something so important about our perceptions, that our perceptions are completely a factor of the circumstances. And just as you started out, Rabbi Dan, that the elders are the only ones who knew even what was going on. And I'm just thinking about what a teaching this is for our time, so that we really can generate compassion when people see things so differently from us, right? Whether it's our partners, our children, or people making different choices about the vaccine or Israel-Palestine, that perceptions are so limited by our circumstances.
Yeah, beautiful, Roberta.
Yeah, thank you.
And not only perceptions are so different, but also capacity. Now, if you remember, Moshe is the one who grew up in the palace and was not did not experience the trauma of slavery. And of course, he has more capacity for intensity than the people do. But here, I think he fell down on the job because given their capacity, they needed more, attention to his being away from them. Just like a good parent would say, like, okay, I'm going away for 2 hours. Here's what's going to happen when I'm away, right? And here's when I'm going to come back. And, there was, to me, a kind of abandonment. And which sort of all those things account for the difference in perspective. Okay. Oh my God, I forgot the lineup. I think Alana, Nehemiah, Sharon, Aluma, Meryl. I'm just laughing because we have a long lineup. So we're gonna do this till 9:10, and we're gonna do some more text just because I want to make sure there's, a lot of nourishment in the room here, in the Zoom room. Okay.
Shabbat Shalom. Part of what really jumps out for me at this part of the text is that there's this movement from the rites of sacrifice. All the duties have just been assigned only to Aaron and his sons. And what is different here is that the people, there's the kind of a re-democratizing that's happening with the golden calf, that the people get to participate again. They sort of seize the reign, so to speak, of ritual again, and they get to be primary participants in sacrifice, as well as, and that Aharon, I wonder about some of the wisdom actually of Aharon here that is unstated, that he collaborates in a certain way, with that impulse, I mean, very definitely he does, but perhaps there's some kind of recognition here that taking away all the kind of means that people had with their bodies and their spirits and their hands, to participate in the sacrificial rituals was a kind of mistake of leadership. And they were expressing a need to be able to be,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really interesting, except for the fact that these are the instructions for the sanctuary. The sanctuary hasn't been built yet, and they haven't heard these instructions yet. But you're right that even though literarily it might be a kind of like this is not going to work, right? This sort of hierarchical situation with only the priests having this direct connection is not going to end up working in the relationship between the divine and the Israelites. I think that's a possibility. So thank you, Alana. Okay, so no one else raising, no more hands. I can't take any more. So Margot's going to be the last one in this lineup. Okay. Nehemiah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Shabbat Shalom.
Please remember to be concise. Thank you.
Yes, Shabbat Shalom v'Yashar Koach. I want to continue on you and on Roberta, Yashar Koach. There's different capacities. And Moses have been already, as I showed with you another time, for 40 years with Jethro and 40 years. And he had a lot of chance to learn a lot that they didn't. And therefore he's able to see the burning fire and not be burned by it. The golden calf has been worshipped through centuries and reached a climax in this period. Is worshipped now actually as a bull, full bull in front of Wall Street. If they made it out of gold, the people would steal the gold, so they made it out of more steady material. So we have to watch in which way we are worshipping the material, what we can see, and not go deep into what we can't see, because what we can't see is much bigger than what we can see, and therefore we become worshipper of the material of the what is seem to be true, and די לחכים ברמיזה.
Thank you.
The,
I'm going to go forward.
I'm translating what I said. די לחכים ברמיזה, enough, the int is enough for those who understand.
Okay, thank you. And I love that you're directing us to what we can see and what we can't see, because part of my goal is seeing what the Israelites, or trying to come to a deeper understanding to what the Israelites might be experiencing in all this, and sort of having some compassion for them. Okay, Sharon.
I guess what struck me this time so strongly was Aaron's silence and his immediate complicity. There must be midrashim, I just don't know, that talk about what went on in that moment. It would seem to me that Aaron knows what his brother is doing. Wouldn't he have been part of the elders?
Yeah, he would have been. He would, yeah, absolutely.
And so I just feel there's this incredible irony at the same time that Moshe is receiving this information about what the priest should be wearing. And it seems to me that so much of the culpability falls with Aaron for not somehow diverting the interests of the Israelites. Yeah. I'm just struck dumb by how quickly he exceeds and says, okay, give me all of your gold. We'll do what you want. There just seems to be a huge gap there.
Yeah, the only thing I could say about that is, first of all, I think you're right to point out the irony, right, of the priest's role and what he actually does, number one. And number two, that it seems that if we look carefully at the verbs, it seems like there's this, like, they are ganging up against him. There is like a mob, right? Mm-hmm. And he, I can only imagine, is scared also for his life. Mm. So we're gonna leave that there. But you're right, his role is very complicated. Okay, Aluma and Miriam, and then we're going on. And I'll take more hands later, but for now, yeah.
This might be a piggyback on what some other people have said, but from the very beginning when you started this, I was really taken with the fact of he's entering a cloud, which has a whole different image than a consuming fire. So you're right, the perceptions here are so different, and their perception of fire obviously comes from fear of abandonment. And something I noticed when I was reading, and I'm also seeing it today, the idea of Aaron saying, taking all your gold, all your jewelry, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that all this gold came from Egypt anyway.
Yeah.
So actually purging them of the gold from Egypt and their past life in Egypt to create this God from Egypt, which Aaron probably knows Moses is going to be upset with, and then to grind it down, and then they later have to ingest it. It's like, this is always going to be with them, but see, you created this from your past, and now possibly you're going to be done with that past. Of course, we're not, but it's an interesting way to look at it.
Especially since they ingest their sin.
Exactly.
Right? They create a golden
get transmuted.
You literally have to drink it. So what does it mean to ingest your own sin and perhaps process it in a way that you hadn't before? Beautiful. Jay, I'm going to ask you to hold off till later, okay? Okay, Margot.
Shabbat shalom, boker tov.
Boker tov.
So, fear. When I get up in the morning and I say the matovu, the first part is fear, yirah. And they say yirat Hashem, Reshit Chochma is the beginning of wisdom. First I go with awe and with fear, and then I balance it. The second verse of the matovu is love, and that has to be balanced with love. What happens when you only have the fear left? It consumes you, and you try to make it go away. You try to make the fear go away. Moshe was the only one that could handle the fear, the lightning and the thunder. Everybody was around Sinai. Everybody heard at least the Aleph, and they said, Moshe, you go up. We can't handle it. We're going to die. They're not going to die, but they're afraid they're going to die. So they send Moshe up. There's the end of your democracy, Ilana. They sent Moshe up instead.
Right. I think you're really right. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You can finish. Okay. You're so right to point this out, because they're getting the distance that they asked for, not the abandonment they asked for, but the, Moshe mediating and not having direct contact with God that they asked for, right? Out of God's great compassion, God pulled back.
I think there's no way to get by in this life if you're always running away from your fear. That at some point you have to embrace the fear and not look for an easy way out. Moshe was their only way to overcome the fear. He was brave enough, or he had enough love to overcome the awe. And now they need this easy answer. They need a replacement for Moshe. They no longer have a way to get to God. And it's a very visual way. It's gold, this artificial thing we consider to be valuable because it shines and it captures the aura. Interesting that Aharon saw the people's words. The people said, now we have this connection. So there's this whole thing about visual rather than oral. And when we received the 10 Commandments, we had that mixing of oral and visual. So it's that was the line that really got me thinking, was that Aharon saw what the people said. And then he said, tomorrow, don't worry, we're gonna worship God tomorrow. We've reestablished that connection.
Yeah, beautiful, Margot. And I'm a little bit disappointed because I thought actually I could go through my entire life without facing my fears, but you're just abusing me of that now. Oh, wow.
Well, if you give them up, though, if you actually recognize them and try to give them up, God, you take the fears. They're too much for me. But instead, if you try to suppress them, they're going to rule you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. And I love your hand motions. I almost feel like you were standing with my Sinai and channeling a bit of Sinai. Thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen and I'll come back to the conversation in a little while. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now I want to take us someplace really interesting. We talked about Moshe's role here, right? We talked about Moshe really not being, not acting like the caring leader or the caring parent, letting the people know, what was going to happen, that he was going to leave, he's going to come back. And here they are, like, just facing, as Margot was saying, this terror, this fear, and feeling abandoned, and facing, the consuming fire of God and the whole thing. But now I want to look a little bit at God's role. So have a little patience. We're gonna dive into a little bit of Talmud here, starting with the proof text that's used in the Gemara and the Talmud, which is from the first verse of Deuteronomy. So Ela Dvarim Asher Diber Moshe El Kol Yisrael Be'ever HaYarden Bamidbar Ba'arava Mol Suf Ben Paran Uven Tofel Laven V'Lavan V'Chatzerot V'Di Zahav. So these are words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, through the wilderness, in the Arava, near Tzuf, between Paran and Tofel, Lavan, Chatzerot, and Di Zahav. So this is the last place name. But the rabbis and the commentators after the rabbis don't see Di Zahav as a place name. They understand it as the beginning of Moshe's rebuke, meaning Dai Zahav, enough with the gold, enough gold. So let's see what happens with that. So Rashi says, V'di Zahav, and this is the Rashi on the first verse of Deuteronomy, Hochichan al ha'egel, she'asu b'shvil rov zahav shehaya lahem. Okay, so Rashi says, he reproved them on account of the golden calf, which they had made in consequence of the abundance of gold, which we discussed came from Egypt. And there's a proof text. I'm not going to go into it. What I want to go into is what the Talmud says about this. So this is from Brachot, page 32a, and it says, "My v'di zahav." So what is the meaning of this phrase, this place name v'di zahav? Amri devei Rabbi Yanai, so the school of Rabbi Yanai said, Kach amar Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what Moshe said before God, the Holy Blessed One, be he, she. Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, bishvil kesef v'zahav shehishpata lehem Yisrael, ad she'amru di, or dai, hu garam she'asu et ha'egel. So Master of the universe, because of the gold and silver that you lavished upon Israel, you, right? Until they said, die, right? Die. We can't take this anymore. We can't take any more of this. It was this wealth that caused Israel to make the golden calf. So a minute ago, I was blaming the whole thing on Moshe. Now Moshe is blaming the whole thing on God. What did you do, God, with giving them this gold and silver? What'd you expect? Okay, so now here the Gemara goes further. There's lots of different analogies, but this was my favorite. So I wanted to share this one with you. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Mashallah Adam Echad Shahaya Lo Bein. So what is this comparable to, this whole situation? How can we understand it? So it's comparable to a person who had a son. Hirchitzo v'sacho, he bathed him and anointed him, v'hechilo v'hishkahu, and he gave him to eat, he gave him to drink, v'tala lo kis al savaro, and he gave him a kind of a purse that hung on his neck, and the implication is that it was full of money. V'hoshivo al petach shel zonot, and he brought his son to the entrance of a brothel. Ma yaseh oto haben shelo yechata. What could the son do to avoid sinning? What could he possibly do to avoid sinning, given that this is how the son has been set up? Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, I'm actually going to go on. So that's one piece I want to introduce to you, is like, what is God's role in all this? And now I want to see God's response and think a little bit about that. Okay, so can someone else read the Exodus 32, because my voice is getting a little tired. Any volunteers? Asher Chaim, hit it.
Hebrew, English.
Hebrew and English.
Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe. Yud Hei Vav Hei said to Moshe, Lech red, go down. Ki shichet amacha asher ha'eleita me'eretz Mitzrayim. Because your people, who you brought out of the land of Mitzrayim, have acted basely. Saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim asu lahem egel masecha. They've turned away from the path that I commanded. They made a molten calf. Vayishtahavu lo, vayizbahu lo. They've bowed down to it. They've sacrificed to it. Vayomru, and they said, Ella Elohecha Yisrael asher ha'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. These be your gods, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, ראיתי את העם הזה והנה עם כשעורף הוא. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, I have seen this people, they are stiff-necked. ועתה הניחה לי, ויחרפי בהם ואכלם, ואעשה אותך לגוי גדול. And now, just stop holding me back. My anger will consume them, and I will make you into a great nation.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, because my chavruta this morning, Sharon, pointed out that the people are so terrified of being eaten by God or consumed by God that they made God so angry that God now is ready to consume them. So their worst fear came true because they avoided, as Margaret was saying, their worst fear, which is what happens, right? Okay.
ויחל משה את פני אדוני אלוהיו. Moshe entreated the presence of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, his God. ויאמר, and he said, למה אדוני יחרה אפך ועמך, אשר הוצאת מארץ מצרים בכוח גדול וביד חזקה. He said, why, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, will your anger be consuming the people whom you brought out of the land of Mitzrayim with great force and a mighty arm?
Yeah, I'm going to stop right there for a second. You were so right to say that you brought out, right? Because Moshe is trying to reestablish the connection between God and the people. But remember that this God wanting to destroy people and God's people is part of a trope, right? That starts with Noah and happens other times, like here, where God is profoundly disappointed with God's people and wants to scratch everything, right? Destroy everything and start from the beginning. Because, you know, God has in mind, and this goes back to Roberta's perspective, a certain project that requires a certain people that is not, God feels at this moment, not possible with the people that God has. The project isn't working. So let me start again for Moshe. Right? Let me just wipe everything out and start again. Okay.
למה יאמרו מצרים לאמור ברעה הוציאם להרוג אותם בהרים ולכלותם מעל פני האדמה. שוב מחרון אפיך והנחם על הרעה לעמך. Why do you give an excuse for Mitzrayim to say it was in bad faith that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and wipe them out from the face of the earth? Rather, shuv, turn back, repent from your anger and have mercy despite, and call back the bad that you were planning for your people.
So again, this is another echo of the story of Noach in the word v'hinachem, because the word Noach, you see, is related to this verb which means to regret or repent. It also means comfort. So Moshe is basically saying, like, what are those other nations? What are the Goyim going to think? Right? What are the other people going to think? Like, you sort of started this great story and this great project. What are they going to think of you? Okay, go on.
זכור לאברהם ליצחק ולישראל עבדיך אשר נשבעת להם בך ותדבר עליהם הרבה את זרעכם ככוכבי השמיים וכל הארץ הזאת אשר אמרתי אתן לזרעכם ונחלו לעולם. Remember your servants, Abraham, Yitzchak, Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever. Vayinahem Adonai al hara'a asher diber la'asot le'amo. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh renounced the punishment planned for his people.
So Moses, as the great prophet and leader and intercessor that he was, right, was able to reconnect God to the grandeur of the vision and give God hope again that, you know, this could somehow go forward, right? Really speaking to God's despair, right? And also great rhetorician. All right, so I want to just point out one more thing before I open things up, which is, so Moses there was like the cool, calm, collected, strategic with God and got God to the place that Moses wanted to get God to. But then when Moses sees what's going on, he totally loses it. So I just want to do that briefly. Vayifen vayered Moshe min hahar u'shnei luchot ha'edut biyado. So thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain, bearing the 2 tablets of the pact. Luchot ketuvim mishnei Evraim mizeh u'mizeh hem ketuvim. Tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on the one side and the other. So what we're seeing here, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a moment, is that these tablets were completely of divine nature, right? They were written on both sides. V'haluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema, and they were a divine creation. V'hamichtav Elohim, and the writing was the writing of God. Hu charut, inscribed, engraved al haluchot, on the tablets. Vayishma Yoshua et kol ha'am bireo, v'yomer el Moshe kol nechama b'machaneh. And Yehoshua hears the sounds of the nation in their doing evil, and said to Moses, there is a sound of war in the camp. Vayomer, ein kol anot gvura, ve'ein kol anot chalusha, kol anot anochi shomea. But he answered, I presume Moshe answered, even though he's not named here, is not the sound of the tune of triumph, or the sound of the tune of defeat, is the sound of song that I hear. And when Moses came close to the encampment, and saw the golden calf and the dancing, here's the dancing, Mocholot, Moshe got very angry. Vayashlech miyado, and he threw from his hands et haluchot, the tablets, vayishaberotam, and he shattered them tachat hahar, underneath the mountain. Vayikach et ha'egel asher asu, vayisrof ba'esh, vayitchan ad asher dach, and he took the golden calf and he ground it until it was thin. Vayizer al penei hamayim vayashk et bnei Israel. So he ground it to a powder and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. Okay, I see there are a lot of hands. It is 9:27. We also have another piece to do, because I want us to get to at least some of the healing and not leave you just with the wounding. So I'm going to again ask people to be brief, and I'm not sure I'll be able to get to everybody, but I will try. Okay. Jay, David, Barbara, Paul, Jill, Beth, again, if we have enough time.
So I'm just only going to say one of the things, which goes back to the earlier passages, but I think it's maybe your main theme. And it's an observation, the whole notion of Moshe going up into the cloud, disappearing, and what it engenders in the people. And it seems to me, and I totally lose track of what's when and all the goings up and down the mountains. But if I remember correctly, at the end of Mishpatim, Moshe also disappears into a cloud.
That's what we just saw. We just saw that. That's what we...
Right. But interestingly, then we go from there to Truma, where suddenly people are giving from their hearts to build a place for God on earth. So it seems like such a contrast to the process here. So I just wanted to make that observation.
Yes. It's an interesting contrast, but I'm not going to address it, but I'm glad you pointed it out. Thank you. David.
You know, it's a kind of a big idea, but I'm just going to try and summarize it as quickly as possible, which is that you have a split screen going on here. You have the people down there, you have Moses up in the mountain with God. And the one thing I would disagree a little bit with Sharon, what you said this morning, is the people have no idea that they're going to be obliterated. You know, they kind of don't have any idea that what's going on up there. And, you know, they thought about it, but obviously they didn't think about it. In the meantime, you know, I feel like the only thing that knows what's going on is God, because God says, hey, look what's going on down there. Right. So to me, it's always made sense as a test of Moses. It's really a test. It's kind of almost a handoff. It's like, are you going to be a great leader, or am I going to obliterate these people? And if you look at it through the lens of Moses, and it's kind of a setup, and I think it's that way because Aaron gets off so easy. He's not he does this whole thing that he gets off. So what are you going to do about this, Moses? And he's spectacular, of course. At the end, he does everything he should have done. God rewards him, and then it's his finger, and then it's Moses that does the second tablets. So I see the whole thing as a test and then a handoff.
Yeah. And also what I forgot to say before, and you're reminding me, like Moshe is spectacular in the situation. And remember that God says to him, let me get rid of the people and I'll set you up as a great nation. Moshe could have, if he had these ego needs, he could have said, yeah, let's go with that. It's all about me. Let's just get rid of everybody else. And, and this Rabbi Scott Perlow talked about this in a Dvar Torah this week at clergy meeting about how Moshe was so identified with the people and somehow was able to stand by, the vulnerability of the people. And despite how vulnerable and flawed they are, Moshe was right there, right? Even though at least, God said, I want to get rid of these people. And Moshe's like, no. These are the people through which your vision needs to become manifest. Okay, sorry. Barbara.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom. Okay, I'll be quick. For all of these weeks that we've been talking about the Exodus, I've been wanting to bring this up and I just held back. But, they got all this gold and they got all this gold from the Egyptians and the silver from the Egyptians that supposedly was given to them, but really didn't they just take it? And does that make it tainted gold? Does that make it something that perhaps they shouldn't have had? In one way or the other? I mean, I'm looking at it through my morality at this point, but and so there it is, and they have it, and they turn it back into this, as other people said today, this kind of Egyptian god with the Egyptians' gold, as you said, and it just. My second very quick point is, how difficult must it have been to try to make this transition from, to worship something ephemeral or something that, they was intangible. And so to me, it's all connected. What the gold is, how the gold is, how is it clean gold? No. And what that then compels people to do. And
in terms of them taking it, was their despoiling the Egyptians inappropriate or not? So God told Moshe to tell them to do it, number one. Number two.
But is that appropriate? But is that,
let me finish.
Okay.
So they were slaves in Egypt for 200 or 400 years. So one could see it as a kind of reparations. Whether it was appropriate or not, I don't know. But in the scope of what happened in Egypt, I would say, even though it's morally complicated, that there's something about it that makes sense. But yes, it's complicated, Barbara.
It's complicated, and we just kind of let it go. I mean, in all of these, we were just, oh yeah, they have all this gold, and I
and it gets complicated. It goes to the calf, and then it goes to building the Mishkan. But I'm going to move on. Okay, Paul.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
Shalom. Thank you. What a wonderful passage or series of passages. The word that comes to mind as I read this and think about it, listen to other people's opinions about it, is chaos.
Yeah.
And my working definition of chaos is a system that is out of control, that no one knows what the outcome will be. And it's important to understand from my perspective that God doesn't know either. He has created this people that we've read about that have free will, and their reactions and actions are so complicated that it is beyond God's ability to understand what the outcome will be. And
Yeah.
Moses understands that.
Yeah.
And Moses says, all right, let me handle it. And I don't think Moses, when he comes down from the mountain, has any idea what he's going to do. But then he does something. And to my ear, it sounds performative. And it turns out to be the right thing to do. But it gets complicated too, because he kills a bunch of people at the end of it, which may not be what he thought was going to happen when he started his thing. So once again, the Torah is giving us a unbelievably beautiful lesson in the complexity of human behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And it's hard to know. Was Moshe intentional? I mean, that moment of shattering and rage is so visceral. There's a beautiful midrash about, well, first of all, that the tablets were so heavy, in part because nothing on the tablets was being sort of fulfilled by the Israelites, right? It's like the words themselves became heavy because there was no connection to, the Israelites' reality and their purpose in the world. But there's a midrash about how, the Sinai is seen as a wedding and a marriage between God and the Israelites. And their worshiping the golden calf is seen as adultery or betrayal. So it was a kind of, the shattering of the tablets is seen in some midrashim as a tearing up of the marriage contract. Like this is not real anymore. This is not true anymore. So just let them be shattered, let them be destroyed, let them sort of crumble into a million pieces, because it has nothing to do with the reality of this relationship. All right, so I see a bunch more hands, and I'm going to do the last healing piece and hopefully get to your hands. And we're not going to have time for any more hands besides the ones that are up, and I don't know if we will have time for those. So let's do the last, because I do want to get some healing into the room here. Okay, share my screen. Let's see. All right, here we go. So there's some great text on this page if you want to take a look at it at any point. But let's see what happens. So as someone pointed out, there's a horrific punishment and massive death. And whether that's spectacular leadership, I don't know. But we weren't talking about the leadership of the punishment. We were talking about the leadership in having God not obliterate all God's people. The sin and the punishment is like too much to take on today. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to put that aside and look at the rapprochement. So right before the scene, Moshe begs God to send God's presence with the people. And God says, I'm going to send an angel with the people to lead you. And that's not enough for Moshe. Like, Moshe wants real presence. Moshe wants real relationship. Okay, so God finally agrees. Okay, and this is what happens after that. So God says to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first. And you'll see the first, the first tablets are all over this passage. They are not forgotten. This is not a wiping away of reality and starting from the beginning. This is a continuation and a realignment of a relationship after a great shattering. And acknowledging again and again that shattering. וכתבתי על הלוחות את הדברים אשר היו על הלוחות הראשונים אשר שיברת. And I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, right? Which you shattered. So there's an attempt to recapture the reality and at the same time acknowledge that reality is gone. It's just gone. והיה נכון לבוקר ועלית בבוקר אל הר סיני וניצבת לי Sham al Rosh Hahar. Be ready by morning, and in the morning come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me, or stand there for me or with me on the top of the mountain. The ish lo ya'ale imach, v'gam ish al yera b'chol hahar, gam atzon v'bakar al yeru el mul hahar hahu. No one else shall come up with you, and no one else shall be seen anywhere on the mountain, neither shall the flocks and the herds graze at the foot of the mountain. So, vayifsol shnei luchot avanim karishonim. So Moses carved 2 tablets of stone like the first. Vayeshkem Moshe baboker, and he woke up early in the morning. Vayal el har Sinai kasher sivat Adonai oto v'kach biyado shnei luchot avanim. And early in the morning he went up to Mount Sinai as God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, had commanded him, taking the 2 stone tablets with him. Vayered Adonai be'anan, vayitziatsev imo sham, vayikra b'shem Adonai. I forgot to say that in verse 4, it shows that Moshe hewed the 2 tablets of stone, where the first tablets were hewn by God. So this shows the divine human partnership, unlike the first tablets. And it shows again that kind of realignment of the relationship, which, clearly there needed to be more of a partnership, which goes back to Olana's point. And perhaps with the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf was showing us is that, without that kind of divine human partnership, right, if everything's like in the heavens, then the people on the ground are going to freak out. Okay, so Vayered Adonai be'enav v'yitzatsev imo. So God comes down in a cloud and stands with Moshe. What a beautiful meeting and coming together. V'yitzatsev imo sham. So literally it says God is standing with Moshe. I just love that. V'ikra b'shem Adonai. And it doesn't say who, but God's name is called. One of them is calling God's name. Vayavor Adonai al panav, and God passes before him. Vayikra, and calls Adonai, Adonai. And if you remember from the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, this liturgy, this has become part of our liturgy. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'chanu, Erach Apayim, V'rav Chesed Ve'emet. Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness. Notzer chesed la'alafim, notzer avon va'fesha v'chata'a. Extending kindness, extending kindness to the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation. V'nakel lo yinakeh foked avon avot al banim v'al bnei banim al shalishim v'al ribeim. So here's the complicated part of things. So what kind of healing and rapprochement is this? This is God perhaps describing God's self, or that's what it seems like, as a person, as an entity that extends kindness to the 1000th generation and forgiving sin, and yet not cleansing us of all sin, but visiting that sin. This is so difficult, right? Of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation. So here's what I learned from Professor Alan Mintz, may his memory be blessed, who is a professor of Hebrew literature at Jewish Theological Seminary. He died about 10 years ago. I can't really remember. But what he said about this, and I think this is how I see it now, that this is actually indicative or reflective of God's tshuva. How? Because God, throughout the Torah, or these different places, is ready to wipe out humanity or the Israelites in one generation. Forget about you. I want to start again. But here, God has figured out a mechanism for the repair of sin that goes across several generations instead of wiping out the generation that is before him. And if we think about the way the world works, I think we know, right, that sin, so to speak, or transgression or misalignment is visited upon our children. And that, that our parents' transgressions have been visited upon us. Like, that is the way it works generationally until it's somehow repaired and worked out. So this is the generational mechanism, but it's a way of God actually saying, I'm committing to this people because I'm not going to destroy them all at once. This is the way sin's going to work. Okay, so that's the, I'm going to stop my share. That's the, to me, kind of a little bit of God's tshuva. So I think we can go till 9:50. So I want to see if we can hear from the people that were waiting. Jill. Hi, Jill. Can't hear.
Okay. Shabbat shalom, everyone. So yeah, it'll be a quick comment. So it was just beautiful, how you mentioned that the tablet was written on both sides. So what I'm thinking is that, and feeling is that what we're studying is one side of it, and the side facing us is how each one of us uniquely lives out the Torah.
So beautiful, Jill. Thank you for that gorgeous image. Yeah.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Each time I study with you, one pasuk jumps out at me that I never noticed before. And this time it was the idea that the first tablets were written on both sides. We see these displays of the tablets side by side. And from the very first beginning of the law, we had to turn it over. We had to turn it over back and forth to
Beautiful. Hafochba v'hafochba, the kuli alma ba. Beautiful.
And so we've been doing it ever since. From day one, we've been doing this.
I love how your comment has just worked so beautifully with Jill's comment and is in conversation with the ethics of the fathers, which says turn her over and over, meaning the Torah for everything is in her. Thank you so much. Okay, Marilyn.
Wow, what a great, this is so rich. It's amazing. Anyways, the line that I'm following is the senses, not with a C, but with an S, that moving from auditory to visual, and then maybe even into kinesthetic. And that how do you take a people, they've heard a little bit anyways of the 10 utterances, but now it's going to be translated into something that they can see. That's what they're waiting for, the tablets that they can actually see and even touch. And that sort of theme of not being able to make the transition of even the original burning bush that could talk, that actually spoke, that was both visual and hearing. And even like Moses, who hears that the people are not doing so well and can be nice and cool, but when he actually sees it.
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, just that whole theme, and then how it almost ends up in a kinesthetic healing, which is that, okay, we're going to take the gold and you're actually going to ingest it. So it's almost going to move to a different sense. Anyways, obviously that could be, that there's like millions of references if you follow that thread, but that's all I'm going to say for now.
Two quick things. One is that the Torah moves from multi-kinesthetic to the sense of hearing is really emphasized in the book of Deuteronomy, which paves the way for the oral tradition. And our tradition has become a tradition of divine voice. And I have to say that the fact that I haven't addressed the punishment is really bothering me, because I know it's bothering some people out there. So I just want to say one thing about it, which is, why would human beings portray this event and this punishment and this God in that way? And how does the punishment figure into the realignment, right, of reality that's needed so that God and the people of Israel can stay in connection? So I just want to offer some